recording. So there's your cue. Thanks for that. Yeah, this is something that we want to be able to preserve and share with other people who aren't here. And with that, the goal of today's conversation is to make this interesting and not just sort of a dry, static lecture, but rather a conversation. So throughout, please do feel free to pop questions into the chat. Please, until we're into the Q&A section, keep yourself on mute so that we can make sure that Nigel's audio is coming through good and clear. But yeah, I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. And so to warm that up, if you would, we would love to know who's all here. So feel free to drop your name as well as where you're calling in from so we can get a sense. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces. It's really exciting to meet some new people. And yeah, the wonderful thing about tea is the community that we have. And it's hopefully experiences like this that draw us a little bit closer. All right, people from all over. Well, a lot of Seattle, great. Seattle's well represented, Bellevue. Tigard, all right. Hi, Jim, hi, Madeline. Hey, Tracy. All right, wonderful. Well, keep it coming. And oh yeah, we even have Alicia from the Netherlands, so. Good to see you. Alicia, I'm actually drinking tea out of the cup that you made for us, so thanks for that. And I hope that you're all drinking some good black Kumaon black tea. So to say that these talks are ones that we try to now have every season, right around either the solstice or the equinox. So with that, Tuesday is the impending solstice. So happy peak of sunlight for the year. I always have a little bit of a mixed feeling at this moment. It's kind of like, oh, we've hit the peak, so where do we go from here? But the answer is up. We just go up. So yeah, this conversation is, as I mentioned, one of a series. We're going to have our next one in September that's already lined up with Ashwini Patel, who's with Tea Promoters in India. So I'll be sharing more information at the end, but we're glad for you to join and hope that this can be a space for inviting conversation, not just like tea, but to beyond that. Friendly reminder, if you can mute yourselves.
Manera, let's feed the cat.
Yep. Yeah, great. In addition to almost being the solstice, we wanted to say tomorrow is Juneteenth here in the US. So we want to recognize and honor the significance of that day and what it means for the continued process in the country of coming to terms with our own history and making sure that helps to inform the future that we're all working together towards. And also to all the fathers that are with us or people that have connections to other people with kids. Happy almost Father's Day. That's also tomorrow. So a lot to celebrate. With that, let's transition to tea. And so as I mentioned, yeah, we're very excited to be able to have this conversation and we do want it to be a conversation. So again, please use the chat throughout. And with that, I'm going to turn off my screen share. I'm going to highlight Nigel here and begin by reading a brief introduction for Nigel. And which is to say, it truly is my honor to be having this conversation with Mr. Nigel Melican, who is a true legend within the world. He's got over 40 years of practical experience growing tea in 31 countries around the world, and he truly has done it all. From developing green tea cultivation in Australia to extracting antioxidants in Zimbabwe. So that level of diversity of experience is all what we're able to have guiding the way we think about tea today. Today, Mr. Melican wears a number of hats within the tea world, from being the CEO of Teacraft Technical Services to being the president of the European Specialty Tea Association. And for this work and his career, he's received a number of accolades from the John Harney Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Tea Awards, to even being commissioned as a colonel in the state of Kentucky. And don't worry, we do have plenty of time for the Q&A to ask about that particular accolade. I first met Nigel in 2015 at the World Tea Expo, which was the first time we were visiting there and sharing some teas from Kumaon. And what I'll never forget was the moment of meeting him and his evaluation of our teas, which I assumed, traditionally you would drink it. In this case, there's a slightly different scenario. Nigel popped the entire dry tea leaf into his mouth and ate it. So since then, I've had the chance to travel across India with him twice. And now Mr. Melican is helping us to guide our development of a farmer-owned tea factory in Kumaon. I feel very privileged to call Nigel a friend, a mentor, and for today, our guest in this conversation. So with that said, let's begin. And again, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, but I'll be monitoring that. And so with that, Nigel, to you, we wanted to start with talking about a little bit about your personal journey into tea, and then we'll get to the future of tea, what it looks like. But if you can just begin by sharing, where did you grow up and what were your first interests or hobbies? How did that help to shape who you became?
Yeah, I think it did. I was born in London. I was born in London actually 5 months before Pearl Harbor. So that tells you how old I am. And we after the war, we lived in a prefabricated house. What happened in England was all the aircraft companies were put over to making prefabricated buildings to house people. And we had a prefabricated house on a bomb site, and it was just rubble. And I remember from my sort of earliest recollections of my father creating a garden from this rubble and watching him make things grow. So I grew up fascinated by watching seeds grow and develop, and then eating whatever it was, because we mainly grew vegetables. So I think that was really what created a sort of an agricultural feeling, a botanical feeling to myself. And I went on to follow that bent.
Got you. And so was your connection to agriculture in the beginning, was that by choice or just by lack of option?
Well, at school, I sort of chose sciences, and I preferred the soft sciences, not physics and chemistry, but biology, zoology, botany. And then I went to college, went to university, did honors botany, and the university I went to, Leicester University, had their course was a taxonomic botany course. Now, taxonomic botany is as dry as anything. All the time you're playing around with herbarium specimens.
Oh,
right?
no. Okay.
So I got I got a good degree, but I had no experience of growing things, and that was really what interested me. So my first job after college, actually I got married 2 weeks after leaving college, and had to find somewhere to live, and a gardener's job went with a house, so that sounded like a good deal. So I started my postgraduate career as an undergardener on a private estate, a bit like a small version of Downton Abbey. To give you an idea of the scale, the garage took 9 cars, a 9-car garage. It was a big family, big estate, and so I worked there for 2 years and learned absolutely everything you could do in practical terms. It was a 7-day-a-week job, incredibly hard work, incredibly interesting work, and really practical. So I was as happy as a sandboy, but my father-in-law didn't think that he hadn't envisaged his son-in-law would be an undergardener who, pretty poorly paid, but lots of experience. So I started applying for jobs in research. I wanted to be a marine biologist. Oh, and yeah, I get seasick, but I still thought it was a good idea to be a marine biologist. So I applied for jobs all around the coast and had one week applying for jobs. I had one stamp left over, and I sort of picked a job with a pin in a scientific journal, and the job was for potato geneticist for Unilever research. Unilever, right in the centre of the country, and I got the interview, and I actually got the job. So, not as a potato geneticist, because it was obvious at the interview that I knew nothing about potatoes or genetics, but I happened to be interested in growth rooms and phytotrons, and I got a job in that. So that's how I ended up working in agriculture as a crop scientist for Unilever.
And that was still in the UK with that initial job with Unilever?
That was in the UK, yes.
And not connected to tea at that point?
Oh, absolutely not. No. I mean, Unilever, at that time, Unilever's only connection to tea was having Lipton Company in America. So, and Lipton didn't grow tea. So no, there was no tea growing.
Not at that point. If I remember correctly, you played a role in changing that.
Just a little bit, yeah. 19, I guess, about 1979. 79. Yeah, I was. Can't remember. Anyway, yes, I first. Well, let's look at the Unilever bit. I started as a crop scientist there. I became an agricultural engineer, all on peas, freezing peas for bird's eye, and then went on to food technology and food product development. From food product development, I went on to non-food product development, and then on to arid agriculture in the Persian Gulf. Now, you may say that's a lot of strange things to do for a botanist, but a company like Unilever allows you to do things if you know how to manipulate the system, which I soon learned how to do. And so I always went for jobs which had a challenge, and I got a reputation for being able to handle challenging jobs where not much was known. And I came back from the Persian Gulf, having been growing plants there with soil conditioners to ease the need for watering. I came back and said, okay, what's the next job? And they said, well, we've got a problem out in Papua New Guinea. It's an agriculture job, but and it's on tea. And I said, well, I don't actually know much about tea at all. And they said, well, go and see, go and you know about plants, and you know about taking a team aboard and getting some work out of them and not losing anyone. Well, not often. So I went out with an assistant, and we went into the field and looked at problems, and the problem turned out not to be in the field at all. It was in the factory. And I'd never been in a tea factory, never thought I would ever go into a tea factory. So as the problem was there and we were told to stay out there and fix it, we spent 6 months fixing this problem in the tea factory, and we did fix it and eventually made the company a fair bit of money. So that was my first immersion into tea, and actually I've never worked in anything else since. So that was in 1980.
And Papua New Guinea in 1980, sent there to help with Unilever's initial sort of figuring out of what it looks like to grow and process tea.
Yeah, it was not the Unilever's, and it wasn't a Unilever company because they didn't have any tea growing companies, but they used to buy from the company in Papua New Guinea, and they wanted the quality improved. That was why they thought the problem was in the field. So they, I came back, and lo and behold, another job came up in tea. Fortunately, it was a chairman's whim. Now, if you've ever worked in big corporations, you'll know that the chairman and the chairman's wife, will come along and they will say, wouldn't it be a good idea if you were working on this or that? And that really is something that they want doing. And because they are in charge, everyone says, yes, sir. So the chairman's whim was to grow tea in Pakistan. And everyone said, you can't grow tea in Pakistan. It's, the climate's wrong, the soil's wrong, everything's wrong. So they said, well, send Nigel out and see what he says. And I went out.
He doesn't lose people on the team.
I went out there and I came back and I wrote a report and I said, well, it's not classic tea country, and it's, the soil isn't right, but you could change it, and the climate's not right, but we could find a spot where it would work, and there's not enough rain, but we could irrigate it. So I wrote a very positive report, and and of course that got shelved. And then a couple of years later, Unilever bought Brook Bond.
Brook Bond.
And Brook Bond, yeah. And Brook Bond had lots and lots of tea estates. And of course I got sent out to, because there were only two people in the entire Unilever company. And at that time it had about 60,000 people working for it. There were only two people who'd ever been in a tea factory in Unilever, an Indian and myself. And the Indian was working in an instant tea factory for Unilever in Sri Lanka, and I had this experience in Papua New Guinea. So we got sent out to come back a bit. Unilever had bought Brook Bond, and Brook Bond had all these tea factories. Mm-hmm. And one of the tea factories they had was in Pakistan. And Unilever had the Lipton factory, and then all of a sudden they had the Brook Bond factory, which gave them 80% of the packed tea market in Pakistan. And the government said, this is a monopoly position and we won't have it. And Unilever said, well, we'll keep the two companies completely separate. And there's a lot of negotiation, let's say. And the ultimate solution was that, yes, they keep the two factories, the two brands, but they had to have a program which would let Unilever introduce tea growing to Pakistan. Now, India grows a huge amount of tea. Pakistan over the border grew zero, no tea whatsoever. It had grown some in Victorian times, but not since. So they fished out my report, and they said, well, we can tell the Monopolies Commission, yes, we will grow, we will introduce tea back into Pakistan. And the deal was that they had to have, I think, 2,500 acres of tea growing, and 1,500 farmers growing it, and a factory built in 5 years.
Okay.
It was yeah. I actually worked out there for 17 years because we underestimated the timing a little bit. But it was very successful. I wasn't living out there all that time. I went backwards and forwards. And in fact, when I left Unilever, I took the project with me to as the consultant to the project.
Well, that serves as a great transition then. So yeah, tell us about your decision to leave Unilever and set up Teacraft.
Well, I never fitted into corporate life. I was a maverick. I had my own businesses. I had a hotel at that time. So Unilever was my hobby, really. I could pick and choose projects, if they, if they offered me something I didn't like, I'd say, no, 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 I don't think so. And, if they'd sacked me, they would have to give me redundancy and lots of money. So, and they weren't keen on doing that. So I really had a very free hand. And that's the only way I could work in the corporate environment. But I've started to feel that I was a small fish in a big pond. And what I really wanted to be in tea was a rather big fish in a smaller pond. So I decided actually with the same assistant who went out to Papua Guinea with me, and we'd worked on all sorts of other projects as well. We both decided that we would leave Unilever and start up our own business, which we called Teacraft. And we called it Teacraft because I had a previous business which was called Foodcraft. And when you're looking for
Oh, Mike Murphy Johnson House. This is Leah.
It's always difficult to find a name, and it just seemed natural to Teacraft.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's how Teacraft started.
And that was in 1990, is that correct?
1990, as a consultancy company and also making equipment. We had made a miniature factory, a miniature tea factory for Unilever on Unilever's dollar. We designed it and found people to make the individual pieces of machinery. And it was a tabletop factory, and you could do everything in that you could do in a big factory, only under very, very tight control, 10th of a degree Celsius. So we took that design with us on the agreement that we would sell machines back to Unilever whenever they wanted them, which they did quite often. So that was how Teacraft started.
And so who are some of your first clients with Teacraft?
Well, I think our first client was the first major one, the first one of importance was the Rural Development Corporation in Australia, who we worked with to develop the green tea industry over there. So then we had a good one for the people making Gore-Tex.
What?
Yes, you'd say, okay. Why? because they were very good at making membranes which let air through but not moisture. So what they thought they could do was separate the aroma going up a factory chimney, a tea factory chimney, off the dryer exhaust. 9/10 of the aroma goes up the exhaust. A mile away from the tea factory, you can smell the green tea, the wonderful aroma of tea, and that's all money going to waste. And they thought that they could separate it in the factory and condense it and sell it for a lot of money, or reapply it to tea, all sorts of things like that. But we worked on it for 6 months, and it turned out that it didn't work at all. It was great fun.
Yes. Yeah, well, it sounds like quite an experimentation-based approach to figuring out totally new ways to think about and harness all that tea has.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, Nigel, I believe your initial training then was in what's referred to as CTC, or crushed air curl manufacturing of tea, which is then the kind of leaf teas that we sell. And so, can you help us explain?
It was. The Papua New Guinea factory was a CTC factory, and then when we bought, I still sort of identify with Unilever. I say we bought when Unilever bought Book Bond. All their factories were CTC factories.
And can you explain what the difference is between CTC and Orthodox?
Yes. Orthodox has huge rolling machines, which back in the beginning of British tea, tea was rolled by hand, they followed the Chinese way of doing it. And you can imagine getting tea leaf in one hand and rolling it like this, like this. And that was how tea was rolled. That was how it was, the cells were broken and that you made black tea that way. And you also shaped green tea that way. So when the British came along and found that that was a pretty inefficient way of doing it, they devised in around about the end of the 19th century, huge machines, 6 foot wide, which did exactly the same. They rolled only a huge vat of tea rolled on a table with ribs like fingers, like the ribs on the table like fingers. So it was an imitation of hand rolling. So those machines created in the 1880s or so, still in use today in orthodox manufacture. But CTC is a totally different system. Imagine 2 toothed rolls and contra-rotating, and the teeth mesh. And these perhaps 5,000 teeth on each roll, all meshing. One roll going 10 times as fast as the other. So this roll goes at 880. This goes at 80 RPM. This one goes at 800 RPM. So it's a scissor action. And the leaf goes onto the roll and it pushes through, it's pulled through. They're very dangerous things. If you've got your hand in, you'd lose it. So that's a CTC. It stands for cut, tear, curl, and the shaping of the teeth and spiral rolls are supposed to curl the tea granules, because the tea goes in as whole leaf, but it comes out the other end as granules, just like about the same as sawdust.
Mm-hmm.
Ideal for tea bags. So the whole of the tea bag industry is predicated on CTC. And although the machines were invented in the 1935 by a Scotsman called he was Sir Robert McKercher, and he invented it to dispose of the waste from the orthodox factories by mincing them up. But it was found to be very suitable for making CTC tea. So just after the war in the early 50s, CTC machines were brought in, and particularly into Africa, into Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania. All those countries were Orthodox to begin with. So in the 50s, they were all Orthodox factories. And within 10 or 15 years, the whole of East Africa changed over from Orthodox to CTC, and still is, although it's just starting to produce some specialty teas using Orthodox. And very proudly, Teacraft put in just the second Orthodox factory in Kenya in 2002, well, factory line for Orthodox in CTC factory.
Incredible. So then, Nigel, to make sure we're all on the same page.
Your original question, though, was how did I get to CTC? Well, because Brick Bond had all those factories, and because I was assigned to these factories to what was known as unileverize them, to look at them to see whether they could be brought into the Unilever way of thinking or whether they should be sold. Yeah. So I got the job of working in dozens and dozens of CTC factories, and I became a troubleshooter, problem solver for those factories. So that's my early training in tea was just solely in CTC.
So the CTC style of production is kind of destined for the tea bag market. And then Orthodox is destined for in the direction of a more specialty. Not all Orthodox might be considered a specialty, but in that direction. And what would you say today globally? How much of the world's tea is CTC versus Orthodox? Do you have a ballpark sense of how to
black tea is about 65% is CTC, and 35% is is orthodox.
Uh-huh.
That's black tea. In green tea, of course, it's nearly all orthodox.
Yeah, got you. Okay. Well, that kind of serves as a nice segue then. Thank you for sharing the sort of background and context on you and sort of what has shaped your experience. And I know there's many more nuggets that we can talk about in the Teacraft journey. But I would love to talk then about the way you think about the future of tea. If this is where we're at right now. I previously heard you talk about a polarization between this kind of CTC approach and the orthodox, which is maybe shorthand for larger changes. And so tell us about this polarization that you project will increase between these two ways of making tea.
Yeah, you can see if you look at what's going on that there is a lot of what I call commodity tea in the market. You know, when we set up the European Speciality Tea Association, the first, at our launch meetings, we actually set it up as the European Tea Society, and someone said, "Well, what sort of tea are you promoting as a society?" And we all said specialty tea, and they said, "Well, why haven't you got specialty tea in the title?" And the answer was, it's very difficult to define specialty tea. And so they said, "Well, come on, what's your definition?" So spur of the moment, I said, "Well, anything you find in a supermarket is not specialty tea." That's a rule of thumb for specialty tea. If it's not found in a supermarket, it's specialty tea. Because supermarkets, really their tea is what I call commodity tea. It's, if you like, you could call it everyday tea, or you could say that it is, it's the lower end of tea. It's poor tea. It has been commoditized because what's happened part of the history of tea, the recent history of tea, the last 50 years, tea has become an everyday thing rather than a special thing. And it's also faced lack of labor, even in countries which were countries which had a lot of labor. They found that the labor drifting off to the cities, and it's been a struggle to pluck sufficient tea. And the answer is to pluck more, is to pluck coarsely, to have less skilled labor, to increase the volume of tea that you're producing at a lower price. So all of this has been really steered by the supermarkets, who've turned tea into a loss leader. In quite a few countries, tea is a loss leader. And people then, once it's been low priced, people recognize that the price of tea is here, and they don't want to go above that price. And supermarkets are very conservative. They don't want to change their prices. They want consistent pricing. And of course, the packers want a consistent product, and they, if you like, dumb it down rather than bring it up, because it's less expensive to make it consistently poor or persistently middle than it is to make it persistently high. So all in all, we found that tea has been debased, if you like, as a product, the mass of tea. But out of that, maybe because of that, we found that some teas have become premiumized. They've been what we now call specialty tea. And that really all goes back to, I think, one person who really started that trend, and the trend started in the States, and that was Norwood Pratt. He wrote a book, The Tea Lover's Treasury, and I think he published it in 1986, and that sparked off a huge interest in the teas that he was talking about in his book, which were very difficult to find. And from that, tea shops started springing up and selling the much better teas. Now you can actually find some of the sort of intermediate specialty teas actually being offered by some high-end supermarkets, but the low ones, you know, the Walmarts and the Piggly Wigglies are still just flogging the really bad stuff. So that's how I define commodity and specialty, and that those two camps are beginning to polarize. They're beginning to draw apart. And if you ask me to talk about the future, which I'm happy to do, I think what is going to happen is that the commodity tea is going to get even worse because labor is getting even more expensive in the fields, and the pressure is even more to grow more tea on less land, which means more intensive farming, which means poorer quality, and that commodity tea is going to go down. And what will happen is that more and more we'll see that tea turned into instant tea and ready to drink teas, and it will descend into eventually being just extracts, and those extracts will be industrial tea. They won't be there won't be a tea factory as such. It'll be a factory, an industrial factory, which will just turn the handle and churn out instant teas. And this is already happening in China, actually. China produces, you know, some of the most unbelievably exquisite specialty teas in the world. They also turn out the mass of tea extracts in the world. So the polarization had already happened there. And I think, you know, the other countries, India will follow on, Africa will follow on.
And so we have the descent into extracts in the industrial category, but give us the hope about the specialty and what promise that holds for providing solutions for the labor and some of the related issues.
Yeah. Well, depending how deep you want to go, you know, we've talked about just lack of labor, for instance, but there are really 6 drivers which are driving change in the future in tea, and those are, I suppose you could say, geopolitics is number 1. Geopolitics, you know, COVID, we didn't spot that coming up. The war in Ukraine, we didn't spot that coming up. Both of those have totally upset the tea industry, or the logistics of the tea industry, because transporting tea now, for the last 30 years, it's been in 40-foot containers, and they cost roughly $2,000 to ship from India to the States. Now they're costing $10,000 or $12,000 to ship, and that has been because of the upset in logistics due to COVID and the lockdown, and now to the upset caused by oil prices going up because of the war in Ukraine. So geopolitics is a big mover it influences a world commodity like tea, and particularly a world commodity that needs moving around the world. So geopolitics, big influence. And next driver for, well, I introduced that because the precariousness of those unforeseen happenings is part of the precariousness in the future. But another big one is population growth. When I was born, the population of the world was 2.3 billion people, 2.3 billion mouths to feed. And today it's 8 billion. So in one lifetime, the population has grown 3.5-fold. So how did that influence tea? Well, the year I was born, the world production was 605,000 tons. 605,000 tons. Today, it's 6.3 million tons of tea a year. So that's a 10-fold increase in tea that we've had. And that's, you only could get that increase, totally, unbelievably, 10-fold increase in 50 years. Sorry, 80 years. But you can only get that by intensifying farming. And as I said, the intensifying has been to grow more on less land. So 50 years ago, we would get less than 1,000 kilos per hectare, which is roughly pounds per acre of tea, made tea. Now in Zimbabwe, there's fields growing 10,000 kilos per hectare. Yeah. So that degree of intensification has kept the price down, but keeping the price down means the farmers have to grow more. So that globalization is a huge factor because it leads to competition for land. Now, if you look at the land, the dry land surface of the world, a third of it is agriculture, a third of it is forestry, and a third of it is unusable. Either it's mountains, which you can't grow anything on, or it's roads and infrastructure, it's cities, it's, it's not growing land. So when a third of that land is for food, but it's being encroached upon by the non-food side. It's being encroached upon by having to build more cities. And we're building more cities because of the increasing population and because of urban drift. Urban drift is also a recent phenomenon. In the past 20 years, 20 years ago, 31% of the world's population was living in towns, in cities. And now I think the latest figure is 56% of the world's population is living in cities. The tipping point between 50-50 was 2010. Mm-hmm. So now we have more people. All the food comes from the depleting rural population, the rural community. Again, you have to be growing food on every scrap of land to feed these people in the cities who are not growing anything for themselves. And so the competition for land is for growing food, and the competition for land is for building new cities. And tea is squeezed between those because tea is non-essential. Tea doesn't feed empty bellies. So tea is getting squeezed. And so is coffee. And so are all the other perennial crops, which aren't really important. The important ones is rice and wheat and maize and the soya. On those you can survive. Soya for your protein and the 3 staples for starch. Mm-hmm. So the tea faces the need to do something about that. Something has to give when all these factors come to a head. And we can throw into the pot, if you like, the depletion of non-renewable resources, oil, of course, everyone knows about oil because oil fertilizer comes from oil, particularly nitrogen fertilizer comes from oil, and oil to run all the machinery to make tea. But the elephant in the room in terms of non-renewables is not oil, it's phosphate. We are running out of phosphates. We have dug up we're nearly at peak phosphate. We nearly have used more than there is left. And we just waste it. We put it in washing powder. Not necessary, but it all goes into the sea. All the phosphate that we eat in our food, we urinate, goes into the sewage system and goes into the sea. So all the phosphate reserves are being just depleted into the sea. And phosphate absolutely essential for growing plants. Okay, now, of course, you want to you want to hear some good news, eh?
Well, actually, just before we've completed the past, can you touch on climate change as well?
Oh, gosh, I forgot climate change. That really is the joker in the pack. Yeah, climate change. How's that affecting tea? Almost in every way you can think. Yields are going down, pests and diseases are going up. People are having to grow tea in Kenya, for instance, where you have Mount Kenya. A lot of the tea is grown on the slopes of Mount Kenya, and all the new tea has to be planted at a higher elevation than has been before. So all new tea is being planted higher and higher up the Mount Kenya. And yes, okay, there's a lot of land, but the sort of fundamental problem with going higher up the mountains is that, you know, mountains are this shape, and the higher up you go, the less land there is. You know, there's a lot of land around the base, but there's not much at the top. But I can remember going to Kenya in the early days, the 80s, and Mount Kenya had snow on the top. And now, no snow on top of Mount Kenya. And Kilimanjaro the same, just over the border from Kenya in Tanzania. I flew over it a few years ago, and there's just a hint of snow now at the top. So it's really getting warmer, and that really has problems. Not so much. I mean, it getting warmer in the town is, and the city is inconvenient, but it's not a problem. But what it means for growing areas is drought. And the other thing is the volatility that climate change brings. And the volatility brings not only drought, but it replaces drought with floods. And you know, Raj, that the monsoon is shifting in India, and it's getting more severe in some places and less severe in others. So people that knew, and I can remember in my days in Pakistan, monsoon started on the first week of July. You know, everyone knew it was the first week of July. And my birthday is in June, 5th of July. So I always used the monsoon as an excuse for getting home for my birthday. Yeah, I had to move out for before the monsoon. Otherwise, you're stuck there because all the bridges go. You can't get out for a month at least. So yeah, droughts, floods, frosts are increasing in many tea areas, and hail. Much of the East African tea industry is being decimated in the early season by hail. And, hail was an occasional thing. It might happen 1 year in 10, but now it's, almost every year. It just strips the leaves off the plants. It's like pruning the plants, really. And they have to grow new leaf. And so you lose 6 weeks of production. So, these are some of the problems with climate change, and some things we can look to ease, mitigate, but climate change is one which is very difficult. particularly the volatility, which means that it's unpredictable, which makes it, again, bringing back to the title of this talk, it adds to the precarious nature of growing tea.
Okay, thank you. We're down. We're in it. And now, Nigel, please, if you would, where do you see signs of hope?
I first got involved in predicting the future of tea in 6 years ago. I did a presentation for the World Tea Expo called "In 2050, Will There Still Be Tea?" And I gave that an hour's lecture with lots of scientific data and information, and any questions at the end, and there were no questions at the end. Stunned silence at the end. And I remember Julie Rosenoff, who many of you who know Northwest Tea Festival will know Julie. And Julie came up to me and she put her hand on my arm. She said, "Nigel, that's the most depressing lecture I've ever been to." I neglected to put in any good news. So I think the good news is that polarization. I think the good news is that although our commodity tea will descend into really industrial tea, I think that the demand for specialty tea at a price will keep that section going. And at the moment, what I would define as specialty tea, the real premium stuff, is just under 1% of all the tea production in the world is what you might call tea worth saving. Tea like this. It's I think that we will end up with an increase, a marked increase, perhaps a tenfold increase in that. So up to about 10% of what is produced now will be in that premium tea category. And it will be, yes, it will be expensive. It will be not a thing that you're drinking every day, but the thing that you're drinking on special occasions. I suppose, if you have to think about an analogy, it will be like champagne. People drink wine every day. Well, some people do, and it's an everyday drink nowadays. In America, the wine industry has produced, done staggeringly well, but there's a bedrock of ordinary wine, everyday wine. In France, for instance, there's vin ordinaire. It's what you drink every day. But champagne, very expensive, very special, not an everyday thing. It's an occasion thing, and I think that specialty tea will flourish within that sort of very special, occasional champagne type occasion for drinking tea. So I think it's that to me, I think is something, and the world is going to get worse without a doubt. That you can already see it happening, and tea will be a bright spot in that world, which is not going to be too happy.
Yeah. And just before we maybe transition into the Q&A, I want to make sure I understand, Nigel, from your perspective, the sort of positivity of specialty tea is because it does help to address some of the addressable aspects that are threatening tea's future. For example, on the labor issue, the idea being that the farmers can earn more.
It can address those because it sells at a much higher price, and because it sells with a much more transparent supply chain, a much more direct supply chain from producer to retailer, which means that a lot of the value is not lost as it goes back down the chain to the producer. So the producer can get a fair wage and can afford to pluck fine, pluck by hand, and even pluck by machine, because we are now developing selective plucking machines, which are much more expensive than, you can buy a harvesting machine for tea bag tea for $2,000. And that would produce commodity tea. It'll produce tea, green leaf for making tea bag tea. But a selective harvesting machine, a selective plucking machine, is a much more expensive piece of equipment, perhaps 5 times as expensive, but it will produce tea suitable for specialty tea. So I can see specialty tea being able to cope with the problems, because it can build in more money for the producer.
Yeah, and also perhaps less labor or less intensive on the production side, if the squeezing as tightly and driving insane amounts of yield. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to find the rays of hope.
Well, many of the specialty producers at the moment are certainly not intensive farming, and there are ways of increasing their farm production without going to these crazy levels of the intensive farming that I was telling you about. 8,000, 10,000 kilos per hectare. It's really not a sustainable business, because you have to pile in fertilizer. So people ask me, what about organic farming? And my answer to that is always yes, very fine, but it's you're swapping a lot of control over what you do for having someone looking over your shoulder and telling you what you must do and what you can't do. And quite often that doesn't make sense. So I encourage people to farm sustainably, not to use non-renewables if they don't have to always use organic if they can, but to supplement the organic if they have to. So it's a sensible approach, rather than being 100% organic, biodynamic. It's and not to be the 100% chemical. So there are ways of improving the yield of the small farmers without going crazy.
Yeah.
And without restricting what they can do, and having very expensive certification, which they have to pay for.
Yeah, thank you for unpacking the complexity around organic. I think from a consumer level, it certainly feels like the desire and the easy direction to go if one can afford to buy it. But it is, I think, even in our experience, seeing for the producer side, the challenges of maintaining a certification and sort of, the other considerations that are hand in hand with the reality of growing and surviving off of agricultural product. It does make it more complex.
Yeah, the European Specialty Tea Association had a webinar just this week, and our speaker was Raja Banerjee. Raja Banerjee, of course, had the Makabari estate in Darjeeling and pioneered biodynamic farming there. And I've crossed horns with Raja many times, and we did again. But I really don't see the future of tea being in burying cow's horns filled with the ground up quartz as a sustainable way of developing your industry. It's an interesting one, and it sells to some people. It's a way of adding value without it's a marketing gimmick, really.
It's classic Nigel to just go straight into the most controversial piece, and here you go. Now sit with it and think about it. So
Well,
I'll refrain from responding here, but
it should raise some questions from you all.
That's right. That's right. So let's do that. I'm going to turn off the spotlight so that we can all look at each other. And if you want to come off of, if you want to turn your camera on, what we'd like to do now is open up this as an opportunity for questions, and you can either drop them in the chat. Actually, that'd be the preferred way. If you do want to put them in the chat, and I'll sort of moderate it, or as Rosalie is doing, you can raise your hand and we can kind of work through there. To say that we just covered a lot. My brain is kind of stretched, and hopefully yours is as well, into the reality of truly what is, I think, a sobering look into the challenges that our favorite drink faces. So yeah, thank you for engaging at this point, and thank you, Nigel, for opening this up. I've been watching the chat. It's been fun to see the conversation today. I want to start pulling questions out. And Josh had posted, Joshua Brock, what has kept you in tea all these years, Nigel, with all your experience in agriculture and tea being a non-essential crop? What has kept you from refocusing your knowledge on other food?
Well, I had branched out into herbals. So that is really, it's a way of building on tea knowledge, is to work on processing herbal teas as well. And I'm working on tea made from soursop leaves in Belize at the moment. We're building a factory out there. But really, tea is a rather manipulative mistress. Once you get into tea, it's very, very difficult to get out of tea. And my daughter came to work for me 20 years ago. She was between jobs, and I had some desk research to do. Before the days of Google, you had to look in books. And so she did 6 months desk research, and having done that, I, like a normal father, said, well, I think it's time you got a proper job. And she said, well, I like tea. It's a fascinating business. She was working with me in Teacraft. It's a fascinating business. How do I find a job in tea? And I said, well, the thing to do is not to find a job in tea, it's make a job in tea. You know, make your own job, and then you can you can do what you like then. So I said, well, if we did that, if we worked together, what would you bring to the party? And she said, well, I know about IT, and Teacraft doesn't know anything about IT. We didn't even have email in those days. So she brought her IT knowledge, and also her people skills, because she'd been working for one of these companies that find donors for charities. So she was on telephone phoning up people and trying to persuade them to donate to charities. So she brought that, and I said, your mum can teach you about business and I'll teach you about tea. So that's what we did, and we decided we would go into specialty tea, and we were the second, I think, or the third specialty tea e-commerce company in the UK. So and now she started off packing tea, and now she's a managing director of that company, which I left in England. So that's just an example of how tea, it clasped you, and it makes you so, I think, so happy that you don't want to leave it. It's not a question of developing other interests. Why would you want to develop another interest?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're the same.
Yeah.
You're a trained electrical engineer, and you found tea. And can you envisage going outside tea?
I don't want to. And actually, one of the quotes that I have taped on, well, actually, it's on my last computer, is from Bill Waddington, who's the founder and owner of Tea Source, actually, although he's recently selling it, a Minnesota-based tea company. And he had said, I don't know what it is about tea. It's nothing magic or mystical. It's just some leaf and some hot water. Yet wars have been fought over it. Fortunes have been made and lost over it. And all I know is there's no other trade I'd rather be in. And that matches my experience as well. So yeah, there is something about it that grabs you and doesn't let you go. Okay, and Dave's got a question. Hey, Dave, good to see you and Kate. Dave asks, in terms of tea as non-essential, what is its role in the larger ecology beyond human consumption? So the tea plant itself.
Precious little. It's not much use for anything. Its use, there's a sort of fringe use for tea as cooking oil, which certainly is used in China, and you can use Camellia sinensis for that. But there's another species which is much better because its seed is more oily, Camellia oleensis, and the clue is in the name. So it can be used for that.
Nigel, I think the question is rather like not from a human perspective, but from like an ecological perspective, like as a tree, what is the role of the tea plant in the mountain ecosystems that it often grows in? Dave's nodding his head. I hope I got that right. Do you want to come off and clarify if there's anything on that question you want to go into more? No? Okay. Yeah. Could you speak to that, Nigel?
As a tree, it's well, as a tree, it's a tree. There are plenty of them, and why would you choose a tea plant as a tree? In the wild, when tea was wild, it was just an understory part of the rainforest. It didn't, it fulfilled the role of just filling in the space between the tall trees and the ground. It sopped up the light that the big trees let through, until it was discovered by humans, 5,000 years ago. It was, no one knew about it, and it was of no use to anyone. So really, it doesn't have any ecological purpose anymore, and it doesn't grow wild anymore. People will find it in the wild, but it's only as an escapee from a tea estate.
Yeah, it's been largely domesticated as a plant, is what it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrew, I see you got your hand raised, but I know Rosalie also had a question. Rosalie,
Ladies first.
Yes, please.
I'll try to explain it. I have this quandary that I think about: how much can I afford, and which tea companies can I trust to maintain some kind of ecological and ethical standards? And that's what I pay Raj to do the research, to try to triangulate good quality in terms of taste and then good ethical standards and what I can afford. And I could drink less tea, but I grew up on a farm and I have an urban garden. So I have this harebrained scheme like, okay, can I wait 3 years to grow a little sad tea plant and then harvest a few ounces and have any hope at all of processing it in a way that it wouldn't taste horrible? But it raises a larger question about a model other than large-scale monoculture and how tea could be integrated across Zone 8 in much smaller quantities.
Yeah, Rosalie, it's happening in the US. I was a co-founder of the US League of Tea Growers, and at that time there were not so many, and they really are starting to take off. And that's not all. I mean, Great Mississippi Tea Company, they have 5 acres, but there are also people that have a backyard. There's a guy in Louisiana or in New Orleans. He's got, I think, 25 tea plants in his garden, in his backyard, and he makes tea. He makes very good tea from those plants, and he doesn't sell it. He just makes it for himself, and he gives it away to friends. I have here in Ireland, I have 3 tea bushes growing in pots, and I've had those growing in pots since 1986. So they came from Pakistan, and so they are full-size tea bushes, and I pluck them, and there's not enough to make tea, but what I do is pluck them and put them in the freezer. And at the end of the year, I will have a big bag. I might have 2-3 pounds of tea leaves, and I turn that into green tea. So, and I also have planted out since I got here. I've got 15 tea plants, new young tea plants growing in the garden. But if you want to grow, if you want to make your own tea from your own plants, it's perfectly possible, and you can make it taste good. You follow some simple rules, and it'll taste good. And because it's yours, it'll taste even better.
Nigel, I'm curious, do you have a rough sense? Like, let's say you want to drink 3 cups of tea a day, every day of the year. How much land do you think you would need to support your own consumption if you wanted to?
Well, it's a sort of back of an envelope calculation.
Those are my favorite kind, yeah.
3 a day. And if you're making your own tea, you can probably steep it twice. So let's say you need 5, well, you could get away with 5 grams. Let's say 10 grams for ease of calculation. So 10 grams a day is times 365 is what is it? 3.5 kilos. 3.5 kilos. So to grow 3.5 kilos of tea, you probably need about 20 bushes.
Oh, okay. That's within reasonable amount.
Yeah, it's a reasonable amount.
Great.
And but the Chinese have a saying that the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the best time to plant a tea bush is around about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, it'll be in full production today if you had done it 5 years ago. So, waste no time, Rosalie, plant today.
Yeah, then I have to go to India with you and Raj and actually learn how to make it so it doesn't taste just like a
well,
dry leaf.
You won't make it in the first couple of years, so you have some time yet.
Well, I look forward to some afternoon bergamot at some point with you, Rosalie. Wonderful. Yeah, and Alicia just said she can help with tea making. She knows what that's like. Andrew, did you have a question that you want to ask?
I did. I wanted to add my voice, and Rosalie touched on it. Nigel is the dean of the tea field. Raj, you are among a small and wonderful group of specialty or speciality tea purveyors. You do the research. I'm a consumer. I'm a tea drinker, a specialty tea drinker. First of all, I never see myself drinking specialty tea occasionally or on special occasions. I drink it every day, and I drink it exclusively, and I can't see adding commodity tea as a daily thing and just changing over to this tea that we all love. So I follow a simple rule to find trusted and honorable suppliers, and to let them do a lot of the legwork, like I think Rosalie said, go into the fields and then try to support them as best I can. And there's a lot of names out there, and I'm sure we all have our favorites, and Raj is certainly one of them. Jason and Shoen and Roy in San Francisco. These are people that I've trusted for decades, and some of them anyway, and try to support them. And I think we all have a responsibility to learn as much as we can and to support the people who are really supporting us by going there and finding it and tasting it and trusting the way it's grown and the way it's made. So I just think we have a big responsibility too. And if we're lucky enough to be able to drink the tea every day, we have to find those trusted suppliers and, be a Pied Piper for them and for specialty tea, because I don't want to give it up. I'm not ready for extract. And I hope it's not ready for me. Yeah.
Andrew, you're absolutely right, and I feel that passionately, and that is why I am a co-founder of the European Specialty or Speciality Tea Association, because part of our mission is to put the producer and the consumer together, and to facilitate the good producers, the people producing the excellent teas, in contact with the people who want to buy those excellent teas. Because
I also want to see, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
It is difficult sometimes, to find the people that you want to buy the tea from.
I want to say I'm also a big fan of, let's call it the tea sachet. That is to say, the upgraded tea bag that contains whole leaf specialty tea in it. And now there are more environmentally sound ways to do that. There are ways to produce them. And I think that's also a very good way to go. And I'm very much in favor of drinking tea in those upgraded sachets. I think you can get an experience that's very close to brewing the tea yourself in a teapot if you just treat it correctly. So I'm in favor of that, as well as whole leaf, whether it's free in the pot or whether it's contained within some kind of bag. I'm fine either way with that. The result is good if it comes from that trusted supplier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I agree. I told you my definition of specialty tea is not sold in the supermarket, but my real definition, and we spent a lot of time in Leicester, the association, to try and define specialty tea. But my key definition of specialty tea is excellence. Excellence in being and how it's grown, how it's produced, how it's manufactured, how it's sold, how it's drunk. Excellence really defines that. And it includes CTCs. There are some CTCs that are so superb that they make shivers go down my neck when I have them falling into my hand in the factory. And tea bags are in the same category. There are appalling tea bags, but they don't make bad tea. The tea has to be good to be in a good tea bag. And there are some good tea bags. There are some excellent tea bags, and the sachet ones that you're talking about, providing they're biodegradable, providing they are made properly, you can't as yet get better in the tea bag. So yeah, I agree. Tea bags, there is a role in tea bags. There's a role in specialty tea for tea bags.
Well, I think that role, I can't say how important it is, because that can bring convenience to the commodity tea drinker. And so that can be an upgrade. Remember, even commodity tea has the name tea in it. So a person is identifying as a tea drinker, whether we approve or would drink the tea that they're drinking. But there's a lot of convenience in a tea bag. There's no question about it. That's why people like soft drinks. You just pop the top and there it is, rather than brewing it. But I think that the specialty tea bag can be a way to bridge to the commodity tea drinker and offer something really delicious. And then just add a little romance and legend, because I think that's important, then you've turned someone to the right side of the force. But they're all tea drinkers. We're all tea drinkers. Whether we would drink the tea that they're drinking, we are all tea drinkers. The essence or tea drinkers are still tea drinkers.
It's very well said. Yeah.
I'll tell you a secret, Andrew, as long as you don't tell anyone.
Okay.
I drink as my everyday tea, my morning cuppa, I drink CTC tea in a tea bag. Now, for the president of the European Specialty Tea Association to say that is, is between these four walls, please. But no, I agree. But the tea in the tea bags, those tea bags is some of the excellent, excellent CTC teas. And I wouldn't drink PG Tips. I wouldn't drink ordinary commodity tea, but or ordinary CTC tea. But there are some, and if you're looking for one, I know it sometimes creeps into the US market, and that is the Yorkshire Gold from Taylors of Harrogate. Yorkshire Gold, not the, there is, they do some other ones, but their Yorkshire Gold is the really good one. And that tea is excellent, as it shows excellence as a CTC tea. It is not a patch on, what we might call a premium specialty tea, but it falls into the category of the very best of CTC teas. And that's the sort of the sort I drink as my morning cuppa.
Good to know the secrets within the four walls of the Zoom that will be uploaded to the internet later. We'll see how secret it is.
I have thick skin.
Great. Well, I think we've got time for Wendy to ask her question, and then maybe we can draw it to a close with a story about becoming a colonel. So Wendy, please come off and share.
Hey, Raj,
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep, please.
So I just wanted to quote Bill Waddington, since many on this call seem to know who he is. And I attended my first World Tea Expo 8 or 10 years ago. And I was kind of wowed by all of these tea vendors. And I said to Bill Waddington, how do I know who I can trust? How do I know who's honorable and who makes good tea? And he looked around and scratched his chin and said, nobody's in the tea business for money. Everyone here
Right.
is in the tea business because they love it. And you can trust everyone at this convention. And I've taken that to heart. And frankly, anybody that's in the tea business, I trust.
Yeah, I think I think it is certainly the case in my experience. It's coming on 10 years of being in tea, that it is definitely an industry driven by people who are passionate about the beverage. And that was kind of the unexpected part for me, is that it's not only like this drink and this connection, but it's a whole community. And I hope that all of us on this call are part of that community. And a lot of the tea room tea owners, the owners of tea houses and tea companies, are certainly the most passionate tea drinkers that there are as well. Great. So with that, let's have Nigel, the story about you becoming a colonel, and then we'll call it a day.
Well, I'd never heard of Kentucky Colonels until I met Jason McDonald, and his email is he uses his Colonel in his he certainly used to in his email address. And I said, well, what is this about? How are you a colonel? I assumed, all colonels came out of the army. I said, did you serve in the army? And he said, no, gracious, no. Well, he didn't. He put it a little more strongly than that. And he told me about how there is this group of philanthropists and called the Kentucky Colonels, which all goes back to the the Civil War and so forth. And there are lots of famous Kentucky Colonels, and they're appointed by the governor of Kentucky. And there's still each new governor has the ability to appoint new colonels. And the Hamburger King is the most well-known Kentucky colonel. So I was interested in it, and why Jason became one. And he was awarded it because he helped out with the flooding and the rehousing and recuperation of people after Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, which did a lot of damage, and in fact wiped out a fifth of Jason's family's forest. They grow timber. They grow timber for making paper and making pallets, and also the tool, the mature timber for lumber. So and the hurricane wiped out huge swathes of their forest land, and that's how he got into tea, because he wanted a hurricane-proof plant. he liked growing trees, but he wanted a hurricane-proof one, and that's how he got into tea, as a very low plant which was hurricane-proof. So he became a Kentucky colonel for that, and so I expressed no wish to be a Kentucky colonel, but he talked with various people, and for the work that I was doing in terms of helping people to grow tea, I think sort of got me nominated as a Kentucky colonel, and so about 5 years ago I became one, and I have a certificate that hangs on the wall.
So you're not an honorary, you're a legitimate colonel?
Well, not in the army, but I'm a legitimate Kentucky colonel. Yes.
Okay. Well,
And whenever needed, you can serve the fried chicken.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you, Nigel. Please, everybody join me in thanking Nigel for sharing the sobering and hopefully also uplifting and hopeful elements of what is a shared feature for our favorite drink. It's been wonderful to share this space with you all. And yeah, thank you, Nigel, for this.
It's been a pleasure.
More. So
thank you for the tea.
Yes, yes. And cheers. Happy Saturday, everyone. I'll stick around if anybody
Happy
wants.
solstice too.
We'll wrap it up. That's right. Yep. Happy impending solstice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. No one wants